Global energy prices and the number of ships passing through the critical Strait of Hormuz are still uncertain, days after top-level talks between the US and Iran wrapped up in Switzerland. There's no definitive picture of how many vessels are moving through the waterway. Some shipping websites are showing a partial rebound, but traffic is still far below normal levels. Hundreds of ships remain stuck. But the UN has started evacuating 11,000 stranded seafarers. The strait lies within Iranian and Omani territorial waters. Now, on Tuesday, both countries said they would look at how to administer the route together while charging fees. But Oman now says it's going to keep the strait open without tolls, and it's designated 2 temporary routes for safe passage. The US president seems to have just confirmed that. Posting on social media, Trump has said that Iran has told the US there will be no tolls, no insurance costs, and no other charges of any kind on ships traveling through the Strait of Hormuz. Donald Trump says that if that is false, negotiations are going to end immediately. Now, we've got correspondents in Washington and in Doha. We're going to go straight to Ros Jordan at the White House. So we're going to bring in Ros. Talk to us more, Ros, about these comments by Donald Trump.
Well, the U.S. President Donald Trump posted on his Truth Social platform in the past hour or so saying that he had been told personally by the Iranians, but we don't know specifically by whom, that they would not be collecting any tolls or tariffs on commercial vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the memorandum of understanding that was signed recently indicated that for at least the 60 days of this MOU, there wouldn't be any collection. But the U.S. president went on to say not just that this would be a matter of possibly ending negotiations if the Iranians are lying to him, but that this is also a situation where the U.S. is not and has not transferred any of the impounded Iranian funds to the Iranian government. The U.S. president went on to say that the U.S. would be taking some of that money, using it to purchase soybeans and wheat and other foodstuffs from U.S. farmers and ranchers, and then in turn delivering those goods to the Iranian people because of what the president described as a dire hunger situation in the country of Iran. Now, there hasn't been, as far as we know, any direct reaction from the Iranian government to the U.S. president's claims that Iran says it's not collecting these tariffs, but we have to recall that this is something that was negotiated as part of the MOU, and it's expected to be a part of the ongoing negotiations as they try to get to an end to the war between the U.S. and Iran.
Ros, we're going to go to Malik Traina in Doha. Gulf countries are going to be watching this very closely, what's happening in the Strait, and, of course, the issue of tolls and whether or not they're going to have to pay any, because it is vitally important to their economies.
That's absolutely right, Rob. I mean, look, when the Strait of Hormuz was closed, a lot of Gulf countries had to stop production because they didn't have the capacity, the storage capacity throughout all these weeks and months to store their oil. So a lot of them have, had to suspend, cut down production. So they're going to be looking at these negotiations very closely. And it's not just the Strait of Hormuz. Also, we have to remember that during this war, thousands of ballistic missiles and drones were targeted here in the Gulf by Iran. According to the International Energy Agency, more than 80 oil facilities in the Gulf were targeted during that war. So, oil, gas is the beating heart of the economies here. The main artery for these Gulf countries to get their oil supplies out to the global markets is through the Strait of Hormuz. So they're going to be looking at these negotiations within this 60-day time frame very closely.
I'm going to go back to Ros Jordan at the White House, because there's a lot of diplomatic effort that's going on in the background here. Of course, we've been talking about the US-Iran talks that have been happening in Switzerland. At the same time, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio's touring the Gulf. And Malik just reminding us, of course, that during the war, some of the Gulf states were targeted by Iranian missiles. What is Marco Rubio trying to say to the Gulf nations when he's making this tour?
Well, the visit that Marco Rubio, the U.S. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, is making to the UAE, to Kuwait, and to Bahrain is to, one, reaffirm bilateral relations between the U.S. and those three countries, as well as promising that the U.S. is going to be robustly defending them from any attacks from Iran in the future. All of these countries, as you noted, had suffered from Iranian airstrikes during the first weeks of the war, particularly on their commercial installations that they rely upon for operating their economies. And so this is something that Rubio really has a mandate to underscore, that the U.S. will be supporting and protecting these countries as much as is possible legally in order to make certain that their support for whatever the eventual negotiated deal between the U.S. and Iran does come to fruition. Without regional support, it is difficult to see how the U.S. would be able to maintain a peace deal with Iran without assuring these countries that their interests also won't be protected.
Let's come back to Doha and Malik. Traina, Malik, just as Roz was pointing out there, the Gulf countries and their concerns are going to be intrinsic to what happens next in the region. Do we have an understanding from the Gulf states about what they do want in the long term?
Well, they want security and stability throughout the region. They've been adamant about that from the onset. You know, since the very beginning, Gulf countries have said that there was no military solution, that both Iran and the U.S. need to come to the negotiating table. But they also say that their security concerns need to be on the table and be discussed. Their concerns have to be addressed in any potential deal. You know, we've heard a lot of statements from officials throughout this war saying, you know, especially here in Qatar, that, you know, Iran is our neighbor whether we like it or not. You can't choose your neighbors. So finding a diplomatic, relationship with Iran is critical to moving forward for this entire region. Peace and stability for Iran, it means peace and stability for this entire region as well. So they're going to be looking at that as well. Another thing they'll be looking at is the factions that are aligned to Iran in Iraq. During this war, Gulf countries accused armed groups allied to Iraq in launching attacks on Gulf countries, and of course the Strait of Hormuz, very important, for Gulf economy. So for Gulf countries, they want a comprehensive deal that will bring long-term peace and stability to this region for decades, for generations to come.
Malik, thank you very much indeed. That's Malik Traina, who's been live for us from Doha, and we've also been listening to Roz Jordan at the White House. Thank you both very much indeed.